Thanks for tuning in to Becoming Something, where we promise to keep the conversation honest and real for young adults in their 20s and 30s. Every moment we live is training for a future moment, and that's why we do this podcast, because we want you to be prepared for everything that life is going to throw at you. Our hope with this podcast is that it would help you become all that God desires you to be. So with that in mind, let's jump right in to this week's episode of Becoming Something.
What's up, podcast world? It's your boy JP in the podcast studio with Nate and Kathy.
Hello.
Kathy
up,
and
guys?
Nate. And you guys ready for this?
Yeah.
And the power couple of Christendom, Gabe and Rebekah Lyons.
Let's go.
That's
Woo!
right.
Wow.
Virtually
Too
with
much.
Gabe and Rebekah Lyons of the Think Empire. That's right. How we doing, guys?
We're good.
Yeah,
What an
that's
That's a little
introduction.
much,
No
much,
pressure,
but
guys.
thank you.
Okay.
Great to be
I
with
know.
you guys.
Wow.
Woo.
If there's any power in this couple, it's right
Oh,
here. This
yeah.
is the
No,
power.
stop.
Monica
We
and
all
I.
know you can lift more than I can, Gabe.
Well, and so today we're talking about gender roles and just kidding. So Monica
weaker
and
vessel.
I did marriage counseling for the first time this year.
No
The first
way.
time?
Yeah, 20 years in a
Wow.
marriage.
Interesting.
And she was like, I think we need help.
That's great.
And well, thank you for taking delight in our struggles.
I think it's great to get
She's like,
help
that's
when
so
you
great.
need
Y'all
it.
needed help.
No, that you recognized you needed it and you got help. That's
Yeah.
great. We want that.
So I called these two, and man, it was so helpful, and so we got an like totally leveraged friendship and got an early copy of The Fight for Us. It is fantastic. So that's their new book, The Fight for Us, available.
Didn't you post about it before it
Yeah,
was
that was
officially
that
released?
guy. I was that
Oh, you
friend.
saw
I
that?
saw that. I
I
laughed
was like,
so hard.
they were like both followed up the post. They were like, okay, so our friend
Thank you.
just told everyone before we did.
No way.
Sorry about that.
Man,
but
Love it.
hey, you.
I was excited.
You love these
And-
guys. Like behind their back, you're
yeah,
like,
he talks
They're-
about
man,
they're
that.
so
think are
great.
my people.
I love
the,
'em.
the Lions are like the best.
Well, for sure,
Aw.
man. Well, because you see people from afar and they're like beautiful people and have their nice house with their chickens, and you're like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
And then you get close and you're like, oh my goodness, you really love Jesus and you love God's word, and you're like raising your kids to have a biblical worldview, and you're having super difficult conversations that everybody else is afraid to have.
Yep.
It's like, it's awesome. And so if you don't know about Think Media, you like that needs to change right now,
Yep.
because it's an unbelievable resource to Christians all over the world, and to churches, and so it's something that we've benefited from. I personally have benefited from, and been a part of. And so I'm excited about our conversation today, because the biggest thing we've dealt with is missed expectations around marriage, which starts when you're single. And so that's why I would just commend to every listener, every single person to read this book, because it's really going to help you with expectations in marriage, which I think is the biggest problem in marriages today, is just missed expectations. And so what do you guys, what message would you have? Our listeners are predominantly single, but there are certainly lots of, I mean, my married friends remind us all the time, we're out there and we're
Yes,
listening.
yes.
So
No, I love that. I think the whole point of, even in this single season or journey, or however long God has that, it's you still have a lens for your marriage, right? You grew up in a home where that formed your perspective on marriage. Whether you want to get married or you are resistant to marriage, maybe part of your trauma is from your parents not staying married. And so it's understandable that, like, there's a lot of different ways to see marriage. And I thought the more we could just talk about it here, like, what are the hopes and aspirations of marriage, but what are, like, the despairs and the discouragement and even the resistance to that idea?
Yeah, and I would say for a lot of us that grew up in the church or grew up in the purity culture space, you know, I know as a guy, sex was like high expectation for marriage. Like, you get married, you have sex, that solves a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And that is not the right view
Yeah.
of marriage. And I think you know, we tell the story in our book of how we in our marriage the first year, someone gave me this awful idea. They said, look,
It's terrible.
every time you have sex, you should put a penny in this little jar, and you should track how often you have sex.
Bad
And
idea.
the whole concept, though, was year 2 till the rest of your marriage, you'll never take those pennies out if you take a penny out every time you have sex.
You'll never
Meaning that,
empty
like,
the
year
jar.
1 is all about sex, right?
Yeah.
And I actually did that. And we tell the story of, we
Is that
literally
right?
tell the story.
You have a jar of pennies on your counter. Is that
That's
why?
awkward,
And there's 3
mate.
pennies right there. Yeah.
But the point was, I grew up, I had a very transactional view of sex,
Yeah.
that it was more of a transaction. And of course, my wife would want to have sex as much as I did. Well, there was a rude awakening in marriage that this isn't the whole point of marriage. It's a second thing. I talk
Yeah.
about this idea that it's a second thing, that when you properly order first things, C.S. Lewis wrote this great essay called First and Second Things, and you get the first things right, you often get the second things. But if you focus on the second thing where it ought to be, then you'll often not get either. And so properly putting sex in the right place, that it's a second thing, that this is one of the natural fruits and benefits of a flourishing, healed marriage of connection, but it should not be the first priority. That's the first thing I would want a single guy to understand. Like, yes, it's great, but it's not the main thing about marriage.
But it is awesome that sex is, like, if you want to stay pure, you are going to move up that marriage date.
Yeah.
Like, if you're just like madly in love with each other and the chemistry's there, you're like, I don't want to wait 6 years for this. So let's be honest about that. I think part of just, the impact of porn or other ways to find gratification will then let you kind of have this delayed, I'm not going to call it adolescence, but it kind of feels like that. Like, you're not quite ready to adult as a covenant husband or wife, because there's other ways to satisfy that sexual frustration, vulnerability, need. And therefore, you almost jeopardize or hijack or shortcut the beauty of union and communion with sex, right?
Yeah.
Like, in covenant, it is great and it should be great. But I think the sex conversation isn't small in this whole, like, let's wait or let's pause or no, I'd rather not. That's what we've experienced in the people we've helped and talked to.
Yeah, so the book is The Fight for Us, and the reason I read it, Monica and I read it together, and I was just like, we've got to talk about this on the podcast, even though our audience is predominantly single. I'm like, this will really help them in aligning their expectations, because, like, my struggles with pornography, early on started with Victoria's Secret magazines. The catalogs that would come in the mail. And that's, as a 5th grader, 6th grader, 7th grader, those would always be sitting on the kitchen table. They were everywhere. There was complete accessibility to them. And I just remember thinking, that's marriage. Like, every night, Monica's going to come to bed in a teddy and whatever those things are called. I don't even know. Kathy's uncomfortable. What is it called? I don't know what it's called.
Like a teddy bear?
No, I don't know. I don't know what it, lingerie.
Yeah,
Lingerie.
let's
Like a
just
teddy
go
bear.
with that word.
Lingerie. Is that better?
That's better.
Is it less offensive?
It's not offensive. It was just funny and
Just less specific.
Yeah, thank you. Specific.
You're okay. Whatever. And it's just like, it's the reality is a couple with a healthy sex life is having sex 0.6% of the time. If you're not really great at the other 99.4% of the stuff, that's going to be a really difficult marriage, like a really difficult marriage. And so,
okay, one thing I'm hearing in, like, preparing or thinking about marriage is sex is important, but it's not the thing. It's not the number one. It's a secondary thing. What are other helpful perspectives or expectations that our listeners can have thinking about marriage? Are there any other unrealistic pressures or expectations that people head into marriage unknowingly putting on their future spouse?
Yeah, so I have found that the question of career for men and women is a big one for young professional adults who are interested in marriage, but they kind of want to get up and running. They want to have success. They kind of have maybe created a picture or vision of what needs to be established prior to marriage. And so I think there's a lot of nobility to that. Like, you don't want to just go in blind, but at the the other extreme could be that you just walk this out and you need to build something in isolation, not with a marriage partner, like, so that you can share in the struggle, share in the growth, grow up together, learn and lean on God in those unknown places. And sometimes what will happen if you wait longer and you establish something, then your view and your lens of what you're looking for becomes very small and very narrow and very rigid, because then you're trying to find a spouse that conforms to what you've created in your image versus building it together, like growing together from the ground up of God. What do you have? Have you put us together so that there's more impact for the kingdom together than there is for each of us alone? And if so, why would we wait? Like, let's try this together. I mean, if we have godly counsel around us and we have a covenant commitment, then let's fail well together versus think we have to be all figured out before we're well enough or mature enough to marry. Yeah.
All right. Another one is assuming that any challenge or fight that's happening in the marriage is your spouse's fault. It's essentially the opposite of, when you were dating, and for the singles out there, you've definitely gone through this where you had that breakup moment and you made this famous statement. You said, "It's not you.
Yeah.
It's me."
Yeah.
Right? Like it's just, we need to break up,
Yeah.
but it's not you. Don't worry about it. And then we get married and it flips and we basically say the opposite. I say to Rebekah, "Hey, it's not me, it's you." Like any issues we're having. And I think early in marriage, if we don't understand that, look, our spouse is probably going to reveal and reflect back to us a lot of the areas we need to grow, that we need to strengthen, that we need to soften, that we've never had somebody this close in our life before every waking minute, that 99% of the time that JP's talking about where we're not having sex and we're relating and we're having dinner together and we're talking and we're working together and we're making decisions together, to realize that God's going to use all that to actually make you into a person that's more like him. And that means there's going to be some friction involved. And the quicker you assess, what am I doing that's contributing to the problem here, not just what's wrong with Rebekah, the quicker you get towards that connected, healing type of relationship that feels so much better than the disconnected, divided one that a lot of people have just decided they're okay with.
Yeah. In reading your book, I was like, I don't know. There's these terms, theological terms that we use: complementarian, egalitarian. It's like, man, I don't even know where they're at on this, which is probably a good thing, because it's because those words aren't in the scripture, and we have these ideas that we try to put everybody in a clean box. But Rebekah, I mean, you're driven, like you have a lot of things going on. You have a ministry. You're an author and a speaker as well. And so what does that look like for you guys, and how do you think about marriage in that context with roles and children and seasons? And so if there's a really career-driven woman listening and that thinks, hey, if I want to get married, but does that mean I have to hang all of that up? Like, how would you address that?
Yeah, I mean, I love Ephesians 4, just the vision of just what does this submission to one another look like in the way it was modeled by Christ, by being humble and humbling ourselves. And then it immediately follows with wives submitting to husbands, and then husbands loving wives and giving up their rights for the wife, right? So sometimes we cherry pick, like, oh, wives submit, and what does that mean? And then what does that mean for men to love? Yet right before that, it's like, no, it's mutual. Yep. It's just the expressions of how you do it are very specific in that text. And I love that, because we're both like the life of a Christian, period, is to be humbled and submitted to the Father and to the Son and to the Spirit. And so if we have a posture of humility, like God demonstrated for us, if he was humbled himself first, then we humbled, then all of a sudden our marriage, there's a humility that is the bedrock for it to succeed. And the humility would mean, hey, earlier in those years, like Gabe felt so clear to start this cultural mission to just equip Christians on the front lines of culture. And we birthed our first with special needs 3 years into marriage. We were kids. Our very first child had a Down syndrome diagnosis, 3 years, so 26 and 25-year-olds.
Wow.
We did not know what we were doing, and we were immediately confronted with our need for God, just to be parents, number one, parents of kiddos, a kiddo with Down syndrome and not knowing how to do that. And then God used Cade's birth, though, to birth this vision and dream in Gabe about cultural renewal. And I mean, it was kind of wild because I felt like at that point, I'm just like learning how to leave work and be home full time in that season, because that's what it looked like. That's what obedience looked like. And then later, about a decade later, after 3 kids, 2 years apart, go to New York City, panic disorder develops, God rescues me. Then God kind of wakens my voice to start writing, but it wasn't anything I had planned or saw coming. And when Gabe recognized that, he's like, oh, wow, I see God doing this. I'm going to make sure that like this is your moment to run and jump into those things. So this shared partnership of even timing and calling is really important in marriage.
Yeah, I think for me, God really convicted me years into our marriage that Rebekah has this unique calling and assignment, and it's not only being a mother, it's not only being my wife, it's also to put something and contribute something to the world that she's experienced through his healing that is going to help heal others. And as a husband, I have a responsibility to cultivate that, to care about that, to be curious about that, and then to come alongside and encourage that happening, which meant for me in my schedule, it meant I needed to create more margin for Rebekah, to have some space and time to just think about that, to pray, to journal, to reflect, maybe to have a meeting or two with people where she was processing through, kind of remembering her gifts, that those first years of our children being young and at home, were not able to be cultivated. And I think we find a lot of couples, like this becomes a big tension point, is one spouse is running after their dream and the other spouse can feel left behind. And we don't think that's God's design. I believe we're both called into this co-mission together where we have these concentric circles. So we both are running after some different things, different assignments. But there's a part that comes together, and we have to be intentional about that, and we have to cultivate it. And so that's why we do a lot of things together, whether it's podcasts, hosting retreats for marriages. We,
Co-run
this book
thing.
together. We co-run our organization, but in very different lanes. We each do different things, but it's not easy. But I'll say it's also sharpened us, and it's made our relationship more connected than ever, because we both have a mutual respect that God's given each of us assignments, and we get to help cultivate that in the other.
Yeah, and I think you look at it from the lens of how do we partner in marriage, both inside and outside the home. And if it's less about job or what the role looks like, or is it paid, or is it full-time or part-time, but going, how do we run on mission, co-parenting inside the home? God clearly calls Gabe to fatherhood as much as he calls me to motherhood. Yep. And then he clearly calls me to run on mission with whatever God's entrusted to me in the same way he calls Gabe. And so it's going to require a little bit of a being nimble, gas and brake for both of us, depending on the season. I, as a mom, have built, thankfully, as a writer and teacher, I have a little more say in the summers, being home, just deciding, like, when the kids are home, I'm home. But then also still feeling the freedom to go, but in there's certain seasons where I can press the gas. But more importantly, it's just us being partners in life, partners in our home, partners in parenting, and then partners in just running after what God has for the two of us.
That's good. What a question we get a lot is just, hey, how healed do I have to be to get married? Like, how far in the past do my sin struggles need to be in the rearview mirror? What does that look like? And does it depend on, I would say it depends on what the sin struggles are, what the nature of that looks like. But how would you guys think about that in terms of like premarital counseling, if you will, and preparation for marriage?
Well, I would just start with the fact that repentance happens in a moment. And so it's more about the encounter of God that just wakens us with like almost a holy grief of our sin. Like if like it can happen quick as far as that turning, that repenting, turning away. But then the repair takes time.
Yes.
Wow.
Right? The brain has to be rewired.
Okay, let me say that pithy. Repentance happens in a moment, but repair takes time. That's great.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Keep going.
Yeah, because, the brain still has these injured neurons and these codependencies and these pathways we go when we feel shame. And often an anxiety response is very similar pathologically to a shame response. And we usually want to run and hide and not tell one another. And the thing is in marriage, like our big challenge that changed everything was withhold nothing from each other.
Wow.
Even if it's fantasy, even if it's like an intrusive thought, even if it's a temptation, because the enemy dwells in the secret, whether you're married or you're single. Yep. So you're going to still be tempted even after years of not looking at porn. You're still going to be tempted in a moment to like have an intrusive thought. And the key is not, am I ready to get married? The key is, am I ready to tell my spouse anything and everything if there's a moment that surfaces?
So good.
Gosh.
That's great.
So there are a lot of young adults listening, and their like one goal in life is to get married. Like that's the thing they're praying about. That's their mission. Like they're trying to get married. Then there's other young adults who are listening, and they are terrified of marriage, don't even really want to get married because they saw their parents and they either stayed together and didn't have a good marriage, or they had a divorce and everything just blew up. And it's like, I don't think I want this thing. Why should young adults desire marriage?
Yeah, I think you're right to point out. I mean, so many people, they've only grown up with one version of marriage that's been the closest to them. They've had to experience the hardship of that, the challenge emotionally, relationally. And so it's normal to have these questions about marriage. I think we go back to God's design to say, hey, marriage is a good thing. This is the way in which God designed the first original sacrament is marriage. Mm-hmm. It's the two becoming one. It's the beginning of a family. It's the beginning of a civilization. I know that's super high level, not necessarily that inspiring, but to just understand God's construct for why marriage mattered. And then when you get to the practical level, I mean, you can look at the social science today to any young person considering marriage. People who are happily married, one of the key contributors to a happy marriage is you've aligned with somebody that shares your faith. So if you're both practicing your faith and your faith is important to you, the divorce rate drops significantly down. I think divorce is like 26% of a divorce rate for couples who have the same faith and a shared commitment in their life to that. But then the data also shows that you're 567% happier than your single friends. Okay, so over life, over time, the reports back of happiness, of fulfillment, of actual financial net worth, all of the data starts to show out that a couple starts to create the kind of life and the kind of rhythm in their life that leads to a life that's more healed, flourishing, happy, joyful. So we'll talk about some of the tensions of marriage that it creates, but there's also this beauty of marriage that there's no other way to achieve this in life than to invite somebody to literally become one with you, to become your partner in life, your spouse, to weigh in on the areas that you need somebody to comment on, because left to your own devices, you're going to go down paths that are not wise, but my wife's there to help me, to guard against going off the rails. And you also, as a young person, I think the vision of marriage our society has portrayed is one that doesn't hold up the covenant at the highest level that God designed it to be. And when we actually regard marriage as a commitment to one another for life, not just a contract, this isn't just about two adults being happy, while that's one of the great fruits of it. This is about a covenant commitment to one another that does mimic the way in which God designed covenant with us. And when you're inside that kind of security, the opportunity for your growth emotionally, mentally, spiritually is just amazing, and it's bigger than if you just in isolation were trying to attain that.
Yeah, so good. The book is The Fight for Us. We're on with Gabe and Rebekah Lyons, and we're talking about marriage for single people. Of course, if you're married, you're going to benefit from it a great deal. But if you're single, I think it's going to be a fantastic resource to help prepare you for the idea of what marriage is. I say all the time that, or I've said often, that it seems like everyone needs to hear one of two things. Either marriage is hard or marriage is good. Yeah. And so there's people out there that think that marriage is going to solve their problem. It's their one goal in life, and they're not really enjoying their season of singleness because they're so discontent in that season that they desire marriage. And honestly, for that person, I hope the Lord holds it from you until you learn some semblance of contentment. And then there's other people that are afraid of marriage, and they are perpetually, just like, hey, selfish, really, to some degree. It's like, I don't want marriage. I want to remain, I want to sow my wild oats and live my own life and not be accountable to anyone. And and they really need to hear marriage is a good thing. He who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord. And so I think everyone kind of, most people fit in one of those two categories. You need to hear marriage is hard or marriage is good. What do you think is one of the most challenging things about marriage?
Oh, goodness. Where do we begin? I would say for us, it's been that I think we're probably both very independent on our own. And, for better or for worse, I grew up fiercely independent. And I say fiercely because I just kind of prided myself in being a firstborn, type A, oldest daughter of 3 girls, and just kind of taking life by the horns. And I also didn't really see in my origin story, my mom was a survivor as well. And so she was like the backbone of our family. She definitely was the matriarch that kind of held things together. So I saw a lot of strong women in my origin story along. And so I loved my dad and felt, such affection for him. But I just think I drew kind of my resilience or even my survival instincts from my mom, and which was really great until I met Gabe, who's also very strong and independent. And I think that created a lot of passion between the two of us. We talk about this in the marriage book, like 4 types of fights, 4 types of dances we do. And one's called the intense. Yeah. And we are both intense. And so while that's been hard for us because we're both intense, if you can prune that down, right, round out those edges, soften and be humbled in kind of the passion and zeal that you have for life in general, then God can really do so much with that. But it has been a pruning and a stripping because we are a mirror to one another. And we go toe to toe. And it's kind of like, who's going to be the last man standing? And so we've had to repent of that a lot to, obviously, first to God and each other, but then even to our adult children who, who got to witness that. Now, what I think is really important about that intensity, the benefit of the intense stance is that you're so passionate, you care enough to stay in it. And you're all about like being all in. And so even if you're all in the marriage and you're not going anywhere, you're also going to be all in on not compromising and just staying roommates. I think what happens in the church often is like covenant is why we stay. And that's amazing. That should be. But that's less of actually the motivator now for people. We're no longer governed by what we ought to do or what we must do. We're now governed as a society by what we want to do. And the problem is like we were never meant to govern ourselves. Like we aren't supposed to live to our own means or our own personal ends, because anytime my freedom extends itself, it enslaves Gabe, right? Like freedom requires constraint. And so marriage just becomes this proving ground of going, okay, everything we do in life, no matter how excited we get about it, requires compromise. And that's a humbling thing, but it's a good thing.
Yeah. For me, I'd just quickly add to that selfishness. Like that's the most challenging thing that gets revealed in a marriage, because you no longer just can do whatever you want. You do have accountability to this person that you're inviting in to help you and to think through things and to make decisions together. And so that means I don't always get what I want. And in fact, as the husband, I need to be careful that I'm cherishing my wife. 1 Peter 3:7, and I'm actually taking extra time to be attuned to her needs and what does she need right now, which could be very different than what I desire or what I need. But we know God honors that, and you learn through your unselfishness that your prayers aren't hindered, which that's a pretty big payoff, right? That your prayers aren't hitting the ceiling. Because God's measuring how well are you as a husband caring for and attuning to the needs of your wife.
What's a big payoff? It's also quite the warning. I'm like, man, I don't want my prayers to be hindered. So we're on with Gabe and Rebekah Lyons. We're talking about the fight for us, and it's a book it's a book about marriage. And as I read it, I just thought, man, we got to get these guys on the podcast to have this conversation. I'm so grateful for all that you guys are doing. Thank you for the blessings that you've been to Monica and I through the years. Any final words or things that you want to finish up with? And I would also ask, as you think about that, if there's anything you would say in terms of what to look for to single friends and a spouse, because I think there's a lot of confusion out there. You know, are we looking for chemistry? Are we looking for physical attraction? Are we looking for someone to go rock climbing with? You know, someone that has to have all the same interests as me? Is it opposites attract? Am I looking for the best bud? I mean, just any thoughts or words of wisdom there?
For us, it was friendship. Our relationship began 4 years before we started dating with friendship and enjoyment of one another. And our relationship grew stronger, and we got committed once we realized we had shared vision for the future. And so while our interests were different, Rebekah grew up,
I was
at
a
band
drum
camp every summer. She was,
major.
I was a
Which
football. I
was
was
shocking to me. I mean, I read that and I was like, you do not strike me as the band camp person.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Band camp.
Gabe's like, I don't know that we would have dated.
I was a
in high
quarterback,
school.
so we had very
Stop
different
it.
types of
He was like
interests.
an all-state quarterback, and I played the trumpet.
That's
It was amazing.
In fact, I'll say this too, JP. We were with a good friend of ours the other day, and he was in college getting his master's in counseling, and he reminded us that he gave Rebekah and I an assessment while we were just dating that was meant for his marriage class to
Like a
see how
compatibility.
compatible were we. And he goes, Gabe, do you remember? Like, the chart came back. You guys were off the chart incompatible.
Yeah.
Like, I showed it to my professor, and he's like, this is like going in the motion of an X. Like, don't do it.
Yeah.
And I say that because even though our incompatibility was so high, we did have vision for the future that was shared. God was at the center. That was our desire.
Yeah.
We did have physical chemistry. And through that, we overcame some of those incompatibilities because we essentially, I think the friction of that shaped us into better people for one another. So you don't have to have everything figured out, but I do think that shared vision is critical.
Well,
that's
and
why
I was drum major and all. I was engaged before Gabe for
wow.
5 months. 5 months. Little sub story. And
Was he also a band member?
Oh my God.
I'm just trying to figure out. Okay.
No, but
Kind of had that
no.
archetype.
So, anyways, the point.
Gabe's
No.
like, yeah, he was.
Anyways, the point is this: is when I imagined a future. Okay, I think really when you are praying through the person you are going to make covenant to give your life to for the rest of your days as long as you have breath, if you take those vows seriously, you've got to imagine a future that's exciting with that person.
That's good.
So if when we started talking and dating, we would get kind of crazy eyes, like, what do you think God might want to do about this? Or I feel a dream about this. And we couldn't afford anything more than ice cream. And we joked that we would like go out for ice cream. We would just write down our dreams together. And there was such alignment in like the bigness of God and the mystery and like for the adventure of it all. It wasn't all mapped out. We didn't know what it meant. But because we could dream together and we had a mutual like vision of like just running after God, then the rest would figure itself out.
Yeah.
We were so incompatible, but yet at the same point, we wanted the same things.
Yes.
And if you want the same things, you can get through a lot of hardship and adversity.
It's really fascinating because I know there's a turning point in your marriage also where he did that where y'all went out and he was just like, hey, what are you dreaming about? Tell me about. You remember that? It's in the book. So just to hear you guys doing that early on in dating, it's fun to hear just kind of about the return to that. Listen, a love for Jesus will cover over a multitude of wrongs and incompatibilities if you're both surrendered to the Holy Spirit. I think that's why you guys have been so good for Monica and I, because I've taught many times at many marriage conferences that we are opposites in every way. And yet a mutual love for Jesus, and just saying, hey, what does it look like to be on mission together? It's gonna win over chemistry and compatibility and a mutual love for rock climbing or whatever it is. So, hey, I love you guys a ton. Thank y'all for having this conversation. Thanks for coming on Becoming Something. And the book again is The Fight for Us with Gabe and Rebekah Lyons. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Becoming Something, where we promise to keep the conversation honest and real for young adults in their 20s and 30s. Every moment we live is training for a future moment, and that's why we do this podcast, because we want you to be prepared for everything that life is going to throw at you. Our hope with this podcast is that it would help you become all that God desires you to be. To find out more, visit becomingsomething.com.